was
that
like...
one went for a long...
back.
Man, you're psyched about this topic. Maybe that should be the lead-in for the episode. Maybe we're already started right now. Like, maybe this is the start. I feel like we're just going to cut this in. What's happening right now. How excited you were. And how far back you're just leaning in your chair. I think we've started. But let me talk about what I was going to say. You know, last night I was in my wetsuit in a non-Rocky sort of situation, actually. Rocky, but not like your typical like Montauk type of deal. And I was getting pushed around by waves a lot. Never lost my feet. Very undangerous situation. You know, not something that, you know, I mean, everything can be dangerous in the surf, but this was really more just some soft waves, I would say. They didn't have a lot of power, not a lot of depth, that kind of thing. But I was getting swept around, and I was laughing, and I was taking some waves to the chin. And it just made me think about, you know, as adults, how weird it would be if we were, like, playing in the surf, you know, and during the daytime. But here I am in the middle of the night, like, playing in the surf, and I was having as much fun getting tossed around in the waves as I would have been catching fish, which I did not. I did not catch any fish. But I had caught fish earlier in the night and was already feeling kind of good. I was like, well, the night's already been kind of successful. It wasn't what I hoped, but, you know, this is now another aspect of the surf was fun. And I was just, you know, it was just fun. I was having fun.
It's nice to have that still, like... When you said, like, imagine doing that, playing in the surf of the day, I'm thinking, like, yeah, that's like me and Aiden playing in the beach when we go to Rhode Island in the summer, jumping around and splashing. But on the flip side, when that happens at night, I don't find I like it anymore. I don't like getting thrown around. Like, I was building the picture in my head of what you were saying you had last night, and I immediately envision myself yelling at the waves, because I do that. Like, I talk to the waves, I swear at them, I yell at them to stop, splash. Like, I get really strange conversations with them in those scenarios, and I don't really like it anymore.
That's interesting. I was having a ball too, because it was one of those nights where you had to have distance and precision, and just trying to get that lure to dig and just get it to swim was part of the challenge. In a lot of the same way that I often talk about with fly fishing, where I'm just trying to nail the cast, and just trying to get the cast right is a fun aspect of being out there. This was one of those nights where time went by really fast because, A, I was having fun playing the surf, and I don't have a kid, so I don't have the excuse, which is definitely an upside of having a kid. Like, you get to then be a kid because you're playing with your kid. I would just be the creepy guy on the beach being weird, you know? But the other thing is, with the waves, with the wind, with the current, trying to get that darter, which we're going to talk about a lot today, actually, trying to get that darter to swim correctly was just part of the challenge. And, you know, I wasn't getting it 2-3 out of 10 casts, you know, 20-30% of the time I wasn't getting there. And I actually find that really rewarding, and time goes by really quick, because it's like, oh, I botched that cast, forget it, I'm just going to bring it in. You know, and for me, that makes time go by fast, and I really like it. So maybe you need to just fish with me more.
Yeah, those scenarios, like not getting the plug to bite, it messes with me and gets me annoyed, because as I'm always thinking that next cast is the cast, I'm like, what if when that wave hits me and makes me do this and lose contact, that's when the fish that I was after tonight, my one shot at the fish of the night, what if I missed it because of that stupid wave? And that's why I yell at them.
That's interesting, because I feel like, what if I hook that one fish and get it despite all of this? How much more epic will it be? And, like, I'm getting beat up by these waves, and they're hitting me in the chin, and, like, now I'm fighting the fish, and I'm just channeling my Bill Wetzel. I'm just out there just full-on Wetzel channel, you know, doing, hey, that kind of thing, you know.
Flashlight around your neck, in your mouth when you need it.
In my mouth, I'm drowning. Yeah, exactly. So anyways, that's actually kind of what I want to talk about tonight. Not drowning and not Wetzel, although I would be happy to talk about either, potentially. Neither of those things. Today, what I want to talk about is breaking away from the rules of the lure. There are so many rules that get instilled about a particular plug and the way you should fish it. And I'm going to tell you that you don't even know when we're recording this, so it doesn't matter. But my fishing up to this point has been good at times, very good even at times. And I have been fishing a good rotation of spots, at least a half dozen. And I've had success of various levels at all of these places. But the one thing that has been steady between all of them is the Super Strike Darter. Now, that's not a surprise at all. Anybody who's fishing the surf knows, or I hope you know, how productive and how critical a tool that particular plug is. Forget about darters, but just that tool and that one specific plug. I just called it a tool. That specific plug in itself, not even just a darter, is so productive and so important, at least for me. And I think it is for a lot of people. And I know many anglers call it the GOAT. They think it's the greatest of all time. And I think there's a pretty good argument for that as well. But anyways, this is not a Super Strike commercial, although there's a nice shout out for them. Across all these spots that are very different, rocks, current, sand, deeper, shallower, I have been using the Super Strike Darter and rigged in the same way. Okay, not rigged differently, not tuned, nothing. And I have been using these, wind in my face, wind at my back, wicked crosswinds, all kinds of stuff. And I've been using this plug through all of these different situations simply by modifying how fast I retrieve it. And I have heard so many anglers, whether it's a bucktail, whether it's a needlefish, or whether it's a darter, those are the three big ones, say, you reel it in quick. This is the darter specifically. You reel it in quick, get it to dig down, and then you go as slow as you can. And if you did that at 75% of the situations at the spots I've been fishing, you would not be able to fish a Super Strike Darter at all, let alone effectively. It would not work. And so I have been going between anywhere from very slow, almost holding it basically, to moderately quickly. And it's hard to model this without having the visual. And I know this is a podcast, so I'm going to try to do it through auditory. Okay. So if a sound of row is my handle turning, row, okay. I've been running
from that real serviced.
Yeah. That service, it's definitely bad service if it sounds like that, which most of my van stalls actually do. I'll be anywhere from that slow, okay, to wow. I mean, that's fast. That's pretty damn fast for what you would consider to be a darter. And even at times, a little bit faster than that, to try and hold it for a second as it's starting to come up. And so really, all I'm trying to say here, Toby, is that method of changing the speed but keeping the lure the same has landed me a lot of fish, hundreds. I mean, probably I know I'm deep into the hundreds, and fished to 35 pounds, solid 35 pounds. And I'm just using the same plug rig the same way in a variety of different places by changing the retrieve speed. And that's all I'm really doing. And I think that that's something that gets lost because there's all these rules. There's all of these rules. So how do you feel about that? How do you feel about any of that?
Yeah, and it's funny, as you're going through with the darter, I'm thinking like, how do I fish it? And I do some of like the traditional, like you said, you cast it out, you lock it in, you give it that pop, catch up. And I start from there, but I think in my mind, I fish it slow, but in reality, I'm fishing on the faster side in general. That like cadence you were working on, probably just shy of that faster one, is probably my standard to start with. I don't think I play around so much with my how do I explain this? My retrieve speed that equates to moving the lure, because a lot of how I'm fishing the darter, my retrieve is actually catching up to the plug, and my motion of the plug through the water comes from the rod movement. So what I try to do is, if I want it to go slower through the water, I'm doing softer pulls, because I get a lot of animation to my darter. I'm envisioning it coming through the water, and you're jerking it and you're shooting it off to the side, sort of like, visioning the spook, the topwater spook working. That's what I'm trying to get it to do. So I'll pop it with the my right hand that's holding the rod. I'll motion it that way, and that retrieve, while it does pull it forward to some degree, it's really catching up line as I go. And if I'm doing the harder, longer pulls and pops or sweeps, then I'm going faster. There's not too often that I don't use that retrieve. So like my cranking motion isn't the speeding it up, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
But I do play with we'll just put it as the overall speed that lure is making its motion through the water. I will play with that anywhere from, once I get off of my standard, what is probably a little faster than generally perceived, I'll go slower, I'll go faster. But I don't usually make that change based on it's more based on conditions. If I'm working it in a current, more current, less current, the part of the swing that I'm working through. Because, if I'm working through the fast part, I'm going a little slower, but then once it breaks out, I may want to hold it in that area, so I'll adjust it. So I'm kind of always playing with the speed multiple times throughout that one cast.
Yeah.
But the one thing that I definitely think, and I've kind of learned though, is if nothing else, I'm probably fishing a darter faster on average. However, I'm implying that speed aside, then it's kind of the traditional, the assumed, the standard retrieve of the darter.
And I think that fast. So it's interesting when you first start out in the surf. I think going slow is the hard part. Everybody wants to go fast when you first start. I think that it's hard to grasp, and this is so distant for you and I. It's hard to remember, but I think for a lot of anglers when they start, it's hard to go slow. You go too fast. And then I think there's the Dunning-Kruger. Look that up, people, if you don't know what that is. Then as you get to some certain point, you start going really slow, and all you do is go slow. And you become afraid of going faster. Mm-hmm. And that is something that happens with intermediate or even advanced anglers, guys who really, guys and gals who've been doing this a long time. It becomes fearful of going too fast. I think fast is the thing that a lot of the listeners here are going to be afraid of. Going fast is okay. And again, we've been shouting out to him a lot recently, but Dave is someone who really impresses upon me with needles. But I will say I'll give a shout out to the Montauk bucktailers, guys like Bill, who I just talked about, and others who are using bucktails in a non-inlet, non-breachway, non-river sort of situation. And I'm always surprised. I'm air quoting right now for people who aren't watching. I'm not surprised, I just need to be reminded that they are always going much more quickly with those bucktails than I, even really think about. I mean, some of those guys are getting close to what I think a lot of other anglers would consider burning. They're almost burning those bucktails, which is how you can punch a 2-ounce bucktail through, a 35 knot wind, but then also not hang up when you're only in 5 feet of water with boulders. And so, again, you're using the tool that's going to get you out to the water, and then you're relying on the striped bass speed and ability, their hunting ability, to get to that lure. And I think that that's really important. The other thing that you just said, which I think you maybe missed, because you said a lot of great things there. A lot of anglers don't use the speed to control the depth. You can, maybe sometimes going fast is just getting it to get in the water, whatever it is. It's just getting it down enough because there isn't any current, or you're going with the current or whatever. Or you got to go slow because you want to get to the bottom, but you get to the bottom really quickly. Mm-hmm. And so if you're just using the same standard retrieve speed all the time, you're always at the same water depth. And even at the same spots, you don't always want to be at the same water depth. Depends on the fish's behavior and the bait, And so I think that really makes a difference too. Do you ever do that? Do you ever change your speed to change the depth?
Absolutely. I was doing that last night. So on one of my metal lip spot, one of my deeper metal lips, it's a deeper spot, and I'll cycle between a medium diver and a deep diver. And I'll absolutely some of the casts with a deep diver, I'll cast, come tight, and just crank it as it is. So I just do kind of a steady, curve through the water where it gets down and then comes back up. Sometimes I'll start it that way. Partway through, I'll crank it down hard to try to dive deeper in the middle of it. Sometimes I'll dive it down originally, and then I'll retrieve the same, dive it down real slow, dive it down. And what I'm replicating, I've come to learn now. I didn't realize it when I was doing it and working, when I was first doing these kind of things. I was trying to fish different portions of this spot and have the lure come in at different angles. So let's say the fish is, for the argument's sake, the fish doesn't move over 6 casts. I want to approach it not 6 times in the same angle and he sees the same thing 6 times come at him. One time it might come down to him. I might come up over. One time I might somehow pause it in front of them. Another time might be way above them. So I'm trying to give them different looks at it. And what I've now come to see is that's like how the freshwater bass guys fish crankbaits, jerk baits, stuff like that, that they'll do the same kind of thing. They'll have their piece of structure and maybe they'll just tick the top of it. Maybe they'll work the sides. They'll come in at all these different angles. And it's like, I learn more and more as I do more stuff on the freshwater bass side that our metal lips are the equivalent of the largemouth bass guys' crankbaits. So I try to see what they're doing and put that in and affect what I'm doing. But some of these little pieces I'm already, by chance was already working through is just the way that I'm dissecting my locations. But I certainly work with that speed on the metal lip a lot, so to some degree on needlefish as well, but most easily with the metal lip because you can bring it down and kind of hold them at a depth a little easier if you know how to. If you have a good feel on it of what it's doing, you know what that plug can do, what your speed does to it, and taking into account the current. If you're cranking down, you're hitting bottom, paying attention to those little things that, you hit bottom, you don't just, oh no, and try to move it in. Well, hit bottom, pause it for a minute. Let it come up a couple of feet. And now does it take 5 cranks to hit bottom again? Or does it take 2 cranks? All right, well, next time I'll come through and when I hit bottom, if I came down real quick, I'll let it come up even longer before I go, or I'll crank it slower. And I'm constantly working through, playing with the speed a lot in those cases with the metal lip.
So sidebar really quick. It's interesting as my experience had grown, how little I got hung up. I'm thinking about you hitting bottom. I don't get hung up anymore. I was thinking this fairly recently again because I kept slamming bottom and I was yanking up kelp and whatever. Mm-hmm. And I was like, man, I used to get hung up. I don't get hung up. I don't lose a lure. I can't remember the last time I lost a lure. I lose jigs. I mean, that'll happen. Yeah. But losing a lure is pretty rare. That's a sidebar. I don't know if that's even interesting.
It was fun. I said the same thing. I was having a conversation with someone last year about that exact subject, and then within like a couple outings, I lost a lure. So say bye to a lure over one of your next few trips. I'll just throw that in there.
Yeah, I was throwing a Mike's bee starter recently, and I thought, I really don't want to lose this. This would be bad. And I was like, you haven't lost a lure in a really long time, but this is going to be the one you're going to lose. You definitely, I haven't got a wind knot in God knows how long that's made me lose a lure. I've had them, but not that's made me lose a plug. I'm like, this is going to be the one. It's going to happen. And then it's like, even I'm like, you got to fish these things. That's what he wants you to do. You bought these to fish. You're not a collector. But man, I was worried the whole time I'm casting that sucker because it's like, am I going to be able to replace this thing? So before I forget, Toby, this is actually in reference to someone's question, one of our listeners. And they were asking, I generally fish my plugs slow. This is what they were saying. And that generally works. But I know there should be times when I want to fish it faster or I should fish it faster. But when it comes to needles, when it comes to metal lips, it starts to feel like I'm burning them. And I don't really know the in-between, and I don't know when to use the in-between, and I don't know how fast in-between is, and it feels like I'm going too slow, and then it feels like I'm going too fast. And I know it's really conditional based how fast I should go. But is there any other tips that you can give me about how fast or slow I should be going? Now, of course, if we got into the specifics of every single plug, we could do years worth of podcast. But what I'm trying to say here is essentially answering that question, which is that you need to decide how deep, how fast. So how deep you go, how fast you want it to swing is what I mean by fast. Not fast, how fast, but how fast you want to swing. If you go slower, it might swing slower. If you go slower, it might swing faster. If you're going against a current, if you're going with a current, again, what you're trying to replicate also matters. And there's never a bad time to experiment. Mm-hmm. It's just going to waste 30 seconds to a minute because that's roughly what a cast is probably going to take you when it's actually in the water. So don't be afraid of playing with it, but really think about what you're trying to do. So don't think about what the plug is supposed to be doing and what everyone does with it and blah, blah, blah. What are you trying to do with it? Where are you trying to get it? What are you trying to replicate? What are the fish telling you? If they're nudging it, maybe try going faster because maybe you want to trigger them to bite. Maybe slow down and they'll start hitting it, or maybe, and then we're not even going to get into introducing pops and, all that stuff that you sort of already got into a little bit because that's a whole nother
if you need, like, if the question is directly being posed, what's the right speed kind of a thing, I because there is no direct answer on it, what I always go, and I even still do this, like on every night, even though if I know the plug I'm throwing, the conditions, etc., I start off sort of testing early on, meaning, am I going fast enough to constantly stay in contact? So there's that one end of the spectrum, based on wind, current, wave activity, all the little factors that are involved. Am I staying in touch with it? And am I hanging up if it's a sinking lure? So you're kind of balancing those as your outer limits, or I'm balancing. Those are my outer limits to start with, and would be sort of how I would say start from that point, and then you start working from there to increasing speed or decreasing without going too far in either of those, because obviously you lose contact. It's not the worst thing. There are times with certain lures that losing contact can be a thing, but that's sort of a next step once you get, you're comfortable with your speed side. And obviously, if you're hanging bottom, you need to adjust your speed, which isn't automatically going faster or slower, because it's going to depend on what you're throwing. If you're throwing a sinking lure and you're hitting bottom, you got to speed up. But if you're throwing a diving lure and you're hitting bottom, you got to slow down. So that's why you have to play that in as well. But I actually had a question for you regarding this. So as you said, when we start, you have the idea of, this going too fast or too slower. Was there a time, do you have any like immediate recollection of, this is when I had an aha that there was no such thing as too fast or too slow, like a hard experience that taught you that?
So yeah, not a situation, not a bite, nothing like that, but a plug. The Savage Gear Freestyler, which is a glide bait, it's made by Savage Gear, highly recommended. As I started to use that and rely on it heavily, the more and more I used it, what I was finding was the fish would respond if I went faster. So then I went faster. So then I went faster. So then I went even faster. And I got to the point where it's bouncing and jumping out of the water. And I'm shooting it across the surface. Like you might fish for like GT in Australia, or tuna or something. And again, the retrieve speed, maybe not super fast, but lots and lots and lots of tip action. And I was like, this is ridiculous. And the fish were just crushing it, and with precision. They weren't missing. They weren't slapping at it. They weren't slashing. When you got a hit, you were on. Now, I lost a lot of fish because they have a solid hanger, and they were twisting off, and I was getting them on the tops of the head sometimes and that kind of thing. But I didn't have to worry about them missing. And that was also another thing that really opened my mind to be like, you can't go too fast. Striped bass are slow when it comes to tuna. They're slow when it comes to marlin. They're slow when it comes to bonefish. But they're still way faster than we think they are. And they're still way faster than you can retrieve. They can chase down anything. If they really wanted to catch it, you couldn't retrieve it fast enough. They could catch it. They're shockingly fast, especially over short distances. So really, the big takeaway from today, and thanks to that listener for asking the question, and also just serendipity, it sort of happened with me, is that don't get stuck up on rules. Fish the plug the way the plug needs to be fished in order to put it where the fish are. And that's really where we wanted to take you today. This has been a weekly edition of the Surfcast Podcast. You can find out more about the podcast at surfcastpodcast.com, or definitely check us out on social media, Facebook, Instagram, @the Surfcast Podcast.